first recorded and uploaded episode of Spur of the Moment, your one-stop shop for the hottest, the dumbest, and the coldest of takes by me, Kyoza Yoi. I'm usually joined by my friends, but today, for this particular episode, I wanted to do a solo podcast to address a couple of things and sort of restart Spur of the Moment from the very beginning and sort of delve into the process of the podcast as well as my intentions moving forward with this program. So, with that in mind, the first topic is essentially what is this particular podcast Spur of the Moment's general theme. The purpose of this question is to sort of identify what kind of topics will this podcast be covering, right? You know, why do people want to come to this podcast? Is there a niche or is there a specific thing? Kind of like how you have Face Check, which is League of Legends and LCS focused. You have Scuff Podcast, which is kind of random, but there is a general theme behind Twitch streaming and sort of internet happenings with other topics around. And you also have like the Joe Rogan Podcast, which is more focused around, I would say, the guests behind the podcast. So again, like every podcast has like a general theme, and I've always kind of asked myself, what is exactly Spur of the Moment's theme as a podcast? Now, I do make the questions and I do prepare as much as I can for topics, and they tend to be more timely stuff. A lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about in this podcast is stuff that happened within the last week or so. I try not to make it too far gone to make it, relevant topics. In addition to that, though, I do want to add some stuff that kind of I've thought up, right? A lot of the questions are going to be things that I've thought about in my car or while I'm at work, and just general things I want to bring up. And then when I do bring up these topics, I let my friends either roast me for my terrible takes on them or educate me on things that I might not know about. That was originally the whole purpose of it, was to be able to, for me to ask a question and then for my friends to just be like, this is what, oh, so you have a question about this? This is how it works, or no, you're wrong. This is how it actually works. And through that, to actually kind of learn and discuss any topic that comes in mind. So that's the general theme. The general theme of Spur of the Moment is actually, I had a question that was Spur of the Moment, and I need someone to answer it. So it does tend to be, that is a pretty random answer for this kind of question. But if anything, I would say the general theme is anything that I have an interest in, which for the moment is mostly gaming, esports, and internet-based stuff. But there are a lot of things outside of just those three specifics that I may or may not ask about. So it's pretty random. I would say it's almost comparable to the Scuff Podcast, just not quite as, just without any of the good / popular streamers. So yeah, that's pretty much the answer to that question. So with that in mind, I do have one topic. First is about corporate social responsibility and fake news. So what brought this up is that I went to a talk on Wednesday about the responsibility that tech companies like Facebook and Twitter, so mostly social media companies, the responsibility that these companies have in regulating the divisive and misinformation and fake news and all these things. And they were obviously talking a lot about the 2016 election, about how Russia instigated a campaign to spread disinformation, a lot of stuff about the slurring of Nancy Pelosi's speech to make it sound like she was drunk, etc., 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 all these things. And the common theme that brought up was that Facebook should just be heavily regulating these kinds of information. Any news sites or any posts made should be more strictly regulated. And to me, the reason I wanted to talk about this is there is always a huge problem with that concept, right? Twitter and Facebook, I use these two specifically, but it also applies to YouTube and Twitch and any other platform that is a platform, right? Because of the communications, I believe the Decency Act, that whole thing where it's as a platform, you're not responsible for things that are made on your platform and said on the platform, because any views there can't represent the views of the platform, right? It goes back to if a white nationalist posts something on Twitter, Twitter isn't then responsible for white nationalist speech, right? It's the person that posted that stuff that's related to that kind of, how do I say this, that kind of information, and therefore Twitter is not responsible. Oh, what the heck. Twitter is not responsible for that stuff. So So I always was really confused about like why we have these people talk about the responsibility of these companies to regulate this kind of fake information and misinformation and to be more scrutinized about it, but they don't talk about how there's a lot of repercussions for increasing responsibility, right? Best example I could say is Alex Jones. He got literally deplatformed for his, we could say, dangerous topics, and some might argue that that is a infringement on free speech, right? If you, at any point, like the First Amendment was never brought up during this talk, and I didn't have a time to actually ask this question to the panel more directly, so I didn't get really a good answer, right? I asked like one of the panelists, like what is your response to the whole concept of free speech being infringed upon if you increase regulations? Because it's bound to happen, right? It's like, okay, if we can't have this kind of speech, we have to just straight up start censoring people that do upload stuff like this, which is, again, violating the free speech principle. So there was not, I didn't get an answer. And I want to say that the correct answer is that you either have one way or the other. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, like, we're not going to infringe upon free speech and also allow the spread of this misinformation. It has to be one of the two. And I feel like we end up in a situation where more channels are harmed due to strict regulations than misinformation is spread. And instead, like, forcing Twitter and Facebook to be like, oh, like, bad, you gotta, no more fake news. It's just, it feels very, like, too far left-leaning about, like, these companies are taking over. Just, it felt like a weird conversation, because as someone who's invested in sort of, like, the whole esports and internet industry, making money off the internet, you know, seeing if, again, how do I say it? If these restrictions are increased, then more channels are going to essentially just have to be censored because the platform can't afford to have these views on it now that they have to be more careful around it. That's pretty much the whole gist of, like, that whole concept. It was just kind of confusing to see how corporate social responsibility applies to tech companies, particularly social media again, right? Like, CSR is easily more applicable to, like, car companies or companies that perform or that do use a lot of, like, let's say, like, global warming. They can impact it by doing more to reduce their carbon footprint and stuff like that. But on the internet, that's way harder to regulate and control. So I don't know what the answer is, honestly. Like, I think there is to a certain degree, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and all that stuff should maybe do better in fact-checking stuff and to prevent the spread of misinformation, obviously. But at the same time, not only is that almost impossible to moderate without essentially half the population working to do that, but it's also just enforcing more policies has never been a good thing when it comes to the internet. So that's not really a thought, just sort of a response. The second topic is, I didn't actually think. Yeah, so apparently Lootboxes is an error on Google Sheets, but I recently came back from Vegas, and I wanted to kind of talk about why I think loot boxes and gambling aren't technically the same thing. I'm comparing, like, a loot box to a slot machine, and the reason I had this initial comparison was, like, with loot boxes, you're not actually guaranteed an item. You're trying to get that really nice special SSR item, and I'm also applying this to gacha games as well. So those of you who don't realize, the gacha games essentially, it's similar to a loot box, but you generally pull for characters or maybe items in the game, and these are generally top tier waifus. So yeah, so I don't treat loot boxes like a gamble, like slot machines or like roulette or poker or anything like this, because you're guaranteed something to come out of the loot box. No matter how garbage the item might be, you're guaranteed something out of a loot box. Whereas in gambling, you're not guaranteed anything. But I was actually given a really good analogy as to why we could treat loot boxes like gambling, and the idea is that you're purchasing entertainment. You're not actually playing the whole gambling side of it all. You're purchasing entertainment, right? With gambling, you're just like, oh, look at all the buttons move, or look at all the cards play. This is all entertainment. Same with gacha games and loot boxes. You're buying the entertainment of opening, like, that risk. And with that in mind, I thought, okay, I can see why people equate it to gambling, but I just think simply like the wording and how everyone tries to equate loot boxes exactly to gambling just feels off. Because I think a huge thing that people are missing with the whole concept of like gambling in games is it's also microtransactions. Just in general, that has just been a whole conversation to have. But gambling itself has been one of the major contentions, is because these are kids playing these games. They shouldn't be exposed to the equivalent of gambling at this young age. So the question then is, how do you regulate it, right? Like, if you are treating it like gambling, are you saying then that any game with loot boxes or gacha games should just be age restricted to like 18 plus? Like, are we just being like, you know what, you want to play Apex Legends? Oh, sorry, it's got loot boxes, you gotta be 18 or older, which technically as a PG-13 game, yeah, so PG-13 maybe, or something along those lines, right? But I just don't think that makes any sense, right? Because I'll be honest, as a kid, it's pretty easy to just grab your mom's credit card and just start swiping and just getting those V-Bucks in and buying the loot boxes just as easily, right? And so I don't necessarily think that this problem can really be solved through legislation. It's more of a problem like with parenting, and I don't like to resort to that answer immediately. I just feel like if parents had better, just knew what their kids were doing with their money, then this wouldn't be an issue, right? You hear those stories about like the kids who spent like hundreds of thousands of dollars on like FIFA, and I have to ask myself, what were the parents doing, right? Like, they did not like check their bank account to be like, I seem to be missing $1,000. This is quite worrying. Like, does none of that go through? Like, it just seems weird. I feel like that's more of a parents blaming the game on their inability to raise their kid kind of situation. That's probably more of a contentious opinion, but that's just it. I just don't like the exact comparison for loot boxes to gambling, because it leads to this weird conversation about regulations that just gets super derailed by other things. Okay, and then another interesting topic. I want to quickly talk about the coronavirus, because personally I'm not affected by it, but I am Asian. I'm Taiwanese, so technically Chinese for any of you who don't care. That's actually going to be a contentious topic, but I saw a lot of stuff about how people are being racist towards Chinese people because of the coronavirus, and I'm not going to lie, that's hilarious to me. Like, at this point now, Chinese people are just like, generally we're like ignored for the most part, because we're not like the minority people really care about, but at the same time, it's like, oh shit, now it's a possibility that we're disease-ridden. People are just like, oh, watch out for this shit. It's hilarious. I was tempted to go, I was on a flight earlier, so like I said, I came back from Vegas. I was tempted to just wear a face mask just to scare people, honestly. It sounded like it would be pretty funny, but at the same time, I didn't want to cause a panic, so not the best choice. But for those of you guys in the US, again, this is sort of, I'm going to be repeating talking points that I heard from the YouTube channel Dr. Mike. He says, just, there's no need to really panic. The coronavirus has not mass spread to the US yet. It's primarily like 90% in China. So unless you're going to China in the next few months, hopefully this doesn't like affect too much. I know that it's actually affected a lot of game conferences sort of around the world, well, at least nationwide. Like, I know that Sony and another company are dropping out of E3, and it's claiming it's because of the coronavirus. There's also like Facebook dropping out of GDC, apparently for the coronavirus. I don't understand what the panic is. I know obviously people are worried about this whole disease, but like, just stop. Everyone needs to stop freaking out. All right, just stop freaking out. I'm just gonna end it with that. Next thing, should Nintendo invest in Super Smash Bros. Melee Esports? So I specifically mentioned Melee here because I refer to the clip of Hungrybox after winning, I can't remember what it was it like Genesis or Smash House or one of those events? He calls out Nintendo for not supporting Melee Esports, and I have the exact transcript here. He says, I really do wish, if anyone from Nintendo Corporate is watching this right now, if anyone's seeing the amount of excitement these sets can get, and everything that goes with it, just give Melee a chance, even if it's just Ultimate. Support the Ultimate scene, support the Smash scene in general. You have people day in and day out streaming, making content, competing, going to tournaments, and we do it all grassroots. Nintendo, I need to say it, I love you guys, but you are the only one not putting in resources into the scene. Look at Capcom Cup, look at that celebration, look at every other game, look at Fortnite. This is the step that you're missing, and if you did that, the culture and the appreciation that you guys would receive would be bar none unlike anything you've received. So hope you're listening. It's probably a shot in the dark, so please support Smash tournaments. So generally, my stance on this is like, I think that companies should support tournaments if they want to. I don't necessarily agree, though, that every game out there deserves to be an esport, right? If the interest exists and the company's interests in capital lie with esports, then it makes sense for them to support the esports scene. The question I hate to ask in regards to this question is, does supporting Super Smash Bros. Melee esports help Nintendo sell more copies of Melee? Right? No, Nintendo's not selling, as far as I know, they're not selling more copies of Melee. It's an incredibly old game. I don't even know if anyone's selling GameCubes anymore. So, like, from a financial point of view, which I hate going down this path, Nintendo has no real reason to invest in Melee, right? They're not going to be able to sell more copies of Melee by supporting Melee esports. But there's an argument saying they can do it for Ultimate, right? So we can skip by Melee just off of that question. Can they even sell more Melee copies by supporting Melee esports, and move on to Ultimate? To my knowledge, they do support the Ultimate scene, but what it sounds more like Lootboxes is saying is, hey, Nintendo, can you also provide us with multi-million-dollar prize tournament, like prize pools, right? You look at Fortnite with the $3 million winner, Dota, League, every one of these esports have multi-million prize pools, and it sounds more like the Smash community is looking to get a piece of that as well. And this is gonna sound really bad as well. The thing is that, like, you guys chose this game not because it provides money, I assume, right? For the longest time, Super Smash Bros. Has never been a profitable scene to be professional in. And for the most part, a lot of esports never started out being quote-unquote profitable, right? It's when the companies decide that they want to actually make an esport for the sole purpose of, advertising their game and making more money off of that, then we see companies be more aggressive with esports. Because as far as I know, there's no esport out there that isn't positive on their net value when it comes to making these leagues and providing prize pools and everything like that, right? These companies do esports because it sells the game, or it sells product. It makes them money to do so. And for Nintendo, competitive scene has never been their focus, right? Nintendo's always made games solely for casual players, in a sense, for more casual players, right? Melee was intended to be a party game. It was not intended to become a competitive game in the first place. And I would almost say that the same goes for Ultimate. Now, they might have addressed some of the issues in Melee and put them into Ultimate, but at the end of the day, Ultimate is still supposed to be a party game. Like, you're supposed to play with items, you're supposed to play on different maps that are kind of funky and weird. Like, there's a whole set of things you can do in Ultimate, aside from, Final Destination, stock Fox v Fox, right? So, that whole thing kind of ties into the whole philosophy of how Nintendo makes games in the first place. They are trying to make money for the casual gamer, and I guess the best example is, like, does Nintendo even support, like, the online Pokemon championships? Like, I don't even know, like, to what extent Nintendo even puts a hand in that. But I do know from I guess some testimony that Nintendo does help out with Ultimate tournaments, but not with monetary pricing. And I think this is the key thing here, is that the question really is, how does Nintendo provide any monetary pricing to Smash Bros. Esports? And the answer to that is no, because that would mean that they directly support, like, esports as a more significant prospect for them. And again, just basing off of how Nintendo has been doing things so far, that just doesn't seem to be the case. So the question is, however, should Nintendo invest in, let's just say, Super Smash Bros. Esports, in, like, let's say specifically Ultimate, right? And I would say at this point in time, they probably actually should. They should probably play a more active role in esports. I think the concept of just adhering to your casual gamers isn't a good enough of an excuse anymore, because of how easy it is to just run a esports division in your company and have it focus on the PR part of it, whereas you can still create games for casual players. Like, esports isn't made because games that were meant to be esports. It's games that people like to play, and people like to play competitively, right? Like, we go back to Melee. Like, Melee was never intended to be a competitive game, but people made it one, and it became it's a very successful esport despite being grassroots. And Nintendo, if they had done esports back then, probably could have made a ton of money off of Melee esports. So it's not too late, I would say, for them to try to do it for Ultimate. The only question, obviously, is would they ever want to do it? Probably not. They probably won't do it just because it just doesn't fit with their philosophy. They make plenty of money already, even without having to invest in esports. But yeah, I think personally they probably should for Ultimate, and like the creating the sort of infrastructure for esports wouldn't be too hard. There's plenty of people out there who've been doing it for essentially for free or for grassroots, that they can contact and sort of work with them to work on making the infrastructure. So yeah, so the initial question, right? Melee? Unfortunately, I don't think so. Melee is just too old of a game, and it can't make Nintendo any money to support the esports scene for them. But for Ultimate, I can probably see it. Ultimate, I can probably see it at some point in time, but that's like an optimistic view of Nintendo. Realistically, I don't think it's possible. And then moving on to that point, actually, kind of goes into balance, right? Should games be balanced for competitive or casual play? And I think this is an interesting question that kind of stems from primarily my hatred for League of Legends balance, but we can talk about different ways about it, right? So we'll start with Melee, actually, right? Or for Nintendo. They make games for the casual gamer, right? They want to reach as many people as they can so that everyone wants to play their game, which is why they balance for a generally more casual experience. Now, obviously, if there's something like that's broken, they'll try to fix it because it's probably a bad experience for everyone, aka Bayonetta in Smash 4. But for the most part, Nintendo builds around a more casual audience. Now, let's look at the other side. We'll use League of Legends, right? League of Legends, I would say, kind of balances more so towards casual play. And I base this solely because if they ever balanced for competitive play, we wouldn't see broken champions being played 90% of LCS. Like, it's clear that Riot wants to have a meta in mind during the LCS and saying, okay, we want to maintain the meta, but we also don't want to like change it too drastically, right? So it's like, okay, what champions are OP? We can't change them too much. In fact, we probably won't change them at all throughout the season. So that's just based on how they've been behaving. That's how I feel like they balance League of Legends for it. The same kind of goes for, I think, CSGO. I think CSGO, for the most part, is the competitive and casual nature kind of blend together because it's by default a competitive game. So it's not changed too much, obviously. But for the most part, I think it's more. I think most players, whenever there's complaints about a gun, it'll get changed for that towards the direction of competitive. And then the last one I wanted to point out was Epic Games, and they do Fortnite. I think it's clear to see they do it more for a casual player base, right? The sword, Thanos, the mechs, all of these things adhere more so to a casual audience. They said it themselves. The mech was made for people to get kills because, what was it, like 1 in 7 games you can get 1 kill generally, the average player. So it varies, right? Multiple developers kind of do whatever they feel is correct, but it feels like the mass majority of them do balance for casual players, and that makes sense when you think about it from a money perspective, right? Is you want as many people to play your game as much as possible, so you want to get as many casual players playing it, so you balance for casual play, right? The more people playing your game, the more money you make. This is simple mathematics. But then obviously that begs the question, right? Is this game even fun competitively? So there's always a huge, I think because competitive players are like louder on social media and stuff like that, we tend to hear a lot more like, oh, you should be balancing this champion, nerf it, or buff the champion, etc., etc., etc. And companies clearly, they obviously don't care, right? No game designer is going to look at the complaints of pro player, despite how dumb sometimes developers can be, and be like, I don't care about what you think. I care about what's going to get, like, Tim, Jerry, John, Xavier, Anne Marie, Sam, Sue, all these people. I want all these people to play. I don't care about, we'll just use Tyler as the name here. Tyler here and his complaints about 80 carry, right? Now, if there's something that breaks the game, obviously, for both sides, I think the company will obviously change for that kind of stuff. But for the most part, it feels like games are balanced more towards casual play. And personally, though, I believe that games should actually be balanced for competitive play. You should be balancing for your top echelon of players, because those are the people who push your game to the limit, and they are the ones who are able to know what is broken, what is abusable, and what like is essentially not fun to play against. Whereas casual players, they aren't capable of like performing to the level of professional players, so therefore the stuff that they can do is way less, and it's less impactful to balance for those players. This is, again, specifically for League of Legends, because this is what I'm more knowledgeable in, or more experienced in. But with the idea of, like, if you want to get more casual players playing your game, you have to first make sure that the game is actually fun to play first, and then anything that's, like, considered broken that would draw players away from playing your game should be addressed. And who knows best about what breaks the game? Competitive players. That's just the way I think about it. For the most part, developers should just play their game, right? It's unfortunate, but like a lot of developers don't actually play the game that they develop, and that's such a huge, I would say, it creates a huge distance between developers and players, and it's not great for game design. But yeah, that kind of covers it for this topic. I go through these really fast by myself, because I usually want to have my friends sort of add on to the topic, so I'll try to get them for next time. But I really want to do this one solo, because we're about to on the last topic, which is actually the specific goals for this podcast. I wrote these down. One sec. Here we go. So the first goal I wanted to do is restart the podcast, redo the podcast, upload it to YouTube, start actually making the podcast. I've always been on and off about this thing, because I never knew if I wanted to do it, or if I wanted to, like, I don't know what I want to do with this podcast initially. And honestly, with how scuffed it is this time, I have to push through the whole concept of like, oh, this was a shit podcast, I'm gonna stop doing it. No, I gotta keep doing it. I gotta like get myself into that mindset of actually doing it, and it'll hopefully start improving after each one. So yeah, and then the second one is to expand content. Yeah, so I wanted to like make more stuff on YouTube and Twitch. I always just felt like recently I just haven't been doing anything, and I feel super sort of lost. So for the most part, this seems like the one thing I wanted to do for now. So that ties into that. And the other two ones are bringing actual guests. So I really want to try to get like one real actual guest, so someone I don't know personally, for the podcast, and talk about stuff like kind of like a host. It's almost like for practice for like talking to other people to a certain extent, but that ties into that. So yeah, so getting an actual guest onto the podcast. And the second one is to get sponsored by something for the podcast. Raid Shadow Legends, if you're listening, I'm super down. I play gacha games like crazy, so I'm down to play another one. But yeah, it's like so yeah, that's it. So from the top, it's, you know, actually do more podcasts, make more content, which kind of ties into the podcast, bringing actual guests onto the podcast, as well as getting the podcast sponsored. These are I would say 4 primary goals of Spur of the Moment, at least for 2020. It's a little late because we are now near the end of February at the time we're doing this, but you know what? Better late than never, and it's never too late to start a new endeavor. So yeah, I guess for now that's the end of it. I didn't really want to go too far in. Like, I didn't want to do too many topics for this first round. I think we're currently at 29 minutes of recording. So for the end of, so you know, for those of you guys watching, I am uploading this to YouTube, so if you have any suggestions, comments, feel free to post them down below in the comment section of YouTube. Hopefully I actually upload this to YouTube. It's gonna take me a while to get everything set up, because I'm actually incredibly lazy. But yeah, I guess for now I'm gonna end it there. This has been an interesting start. I've pretty much just been rambling for 30 minutes, and honestly, I could have rambled a lot more. So yeah, that'll be all.